Is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the fishing channel. One thing that we're gonna get clear is that this is for the state of Minnesota, since I do live in this state. But what I will say is that it's best to look at your own DNR, or whatever they call it, Department of Natural Resources, you know, in your state. Not every state has a great, website. Some are more just being built in, or some are just, a bit more less user friendly. But I love Minnesota's DNR website just because of how easy the user experience is and just kind of what you need, right? So I have a few things that I look for in the map. This is for when I am trying to look at new lakes to try out. And so we have the metro area, which includes the Twin Cities, both Minneapolis and St. Paul. You kind of get a feel for how far things are if you want to go out and explore, south or west or east or north. But generally, as I said in my first video, I generally don't like to fish in the metro area just because of how easily accessible it is. A lot of people go fishing there, they take kids there, there's a lot of pressure. A lot of people who like to go, you know, surfing with their big pontoons and stuff, which is all fine and dandy. But when I want to have more of that independence, I know that majority of people are not going to be willing to drive out an hour or two, mostly 2 hours away just to go surfing or even fishing. And so there's less pressure. But for example, we can look at a pretty popular lake here. For example, a pretty popular lake here that's known in the Twin Cities here is Phelan Lake. Pretty popular, known by a lot of locals here. It does have a few regulations, mainly on the muskie, which is just a size limit. So the fishing page helps us look at any special regulations for the lake, which is really helpful. You'll also get to see the fish species that they have caught in all of their surveys. So even though they might have caught only one green sunfish, for example, in 1997, they will still consider it. And it's important to remember that when DNR does the survey, it is just a snapshot of the time and place and weather conditions of that specific survey, and kind of giving us a glimpse within how the lake is doing overall. What's also helpful is that they give us information about the lake itself, with how deep it is, the shore length and the littoral area, and the actual area itself. And so the area basically just explains how big the lake is. I don't personally use area that too much. Littoral area is somewhat helpful. It tells us kind of, it gives us the definition here, which or how much area is less than 15 feet. And this is exactly where you'll find majority of the plants, but also fish as well, because fish likes structure. Bait fish or minnows love structure, and so those are the areas that you'll find the majority of the fish and your chances of success. So 80 acres within 197 acres, which isn't too much, but really just depends on kind of how you're looking at the lakes. But I'm not too much of an expert on this, but I will say that the more littoral area there is, the harder generally it would be to fish, in my experience, because I've fished lakes that were at maximum depth of 15-20 feet, and they have winter kills that repeatedly happen, which isn't the worst. But if I'm targeting crappies, they will have boom bust years where there'll be crazy amounts of crappies, but there's just not enough food to forage for them. And so if you're not going at the right specific time, you might never go and capture these boom bust years, but also you'll have more area to cover when fishing, because majority of the area will be relatively well for the fish, so they could be anywhere. So generally, I like the littoral area to be relatively small. Shore length is just the circumference of a lake, if you want to think of it that way. And then these are just additional information of where it is. But The other things that you might want to look for is invasive species, stop aquatic hitchhikers, water clarity, but generally that's also included in the lake surveys as well. Fish stocking is going to be really important when looking at kind of what you're trying to go for, right? And so we see that there was a stocking in 2024 for walleye. These are yearlings, and so they're kind of quite grown, and so they're at least 1 years old. They might be around 3 to 20 inches depending on the species. For walleye, that's around 6 to 12 inches. And so within a year, these walleye stocking will be ready to eat and harvest, around that 15 inches range. And so in the year of 2025, these walleye that just got stocked might be pretty good to go for right now, right? Additionally, we have other species such as tiger muskies, white bass, but generally older stockings I don't take much into consideration unless I want to go for a specific species like white bass, which I didn't know Phelan had, so that's good to know for now. Another thing that I will say is water quality. That would be important, especially if you're trying to take the water quality and see if you're trying to keep fish. Do you want to ingest mercury or even other potential contaminants? That's going to be very important, as a lot of lakes generally are contaminated. But if you're not pregnant or a child, then most of the time it's fine, unless you're eating super heavy fish every day. Majority of the limitations is always to just have 2 fish meals a week. But generally, the further you go out, the less you have to worry about that. There still will be a bit of contaminant, but it's important to look at the water quality when you're looking at the DNR website. So now the main meat of this is the lake survey. The first thing I do is look at, of course, this information, which is similar to just the last page, but they also give us the average water clarity. So it's about 10 feet, meaning that you could see within the water on average 10 feet. And this helps us understand kind of a bit of the water quality, for keeping fish, but also, more into the strategy of what you're trying to go into as well. And so I'd say generally, 6 to 12 feet, I wouldn't be too worried about my line. I consider that still murky. Where I have seen much more clear water is when it gets above 12 to even 14 to I have seen 18 feet of average water clarity. And those are when you really want, 6. And I even have 12 feet of leader, which is probably not necessary, but I just do it just to do it anyways, since I generally change my lures out anyways. And Palomar Knot uses, relatively a lot of line when you're changing out, so I have a longer leader in that sense. Another thing that you'll want to look for is the survey, because they would do 2 types of survey. Now, this might be different for other states, but Minnesota, you have the standard survey and then your targeted survey. Depending on the conservation officer, I think, or maybe just the DNR who controls the lake, they will have a targeted survey for the species that they are mainly doing conservation efforts for. And so some lakes are more focused on crappies, some lakes are more focused on walleyes, while some lakes are more focused on pikes and muskies, or sometimes the lakes are a combination of those species. And so it's important that if we want to go for the species that they're conserving for, a targeted survey might be more, in the near present time, but also give us a deeper glimpse. But I will say that generally the CPUE would be higher in these targeted surveys. And so I look at more of the weight and the count when it comes to targeted surveys. But it's nice to use the targeted surveys because they're relatively always more recent when they're conducted. But standard surveys, just they're standard surveys that usually includes trap nets and gill nets, looking for all kinds of species, and so they're not limiting to anything. And so we're able to see all the species that they were able to capture in their survey, including blackhead, crappies, bluegill, bowfin, sunfish, bass, pike, sunfish again, walleye, white sucker, and perch. Now, the difference between trap nets and gill nets, if I remember correctly, is that trap nets are fish nets basically set up near a shallow area, while gill nets are set up to kind of be more on the deeper side. And so you kind of get an understanding of where fish are depending on the relative depth, right? And so if you have, or you're targeting for crappies at Phelan Lake, and you see that there's, okay, the difference between 1.22 and 0.17 for CPUE, trap nets are higher. Okay, well, this tells me that black crappies would be generally in more shallow areas because they were caught more in the trap nets, and trap nets are in the shallow areas. And so, if I go to this lake, then that gives me an understanding, okay, perhaps I might not want to go out to 20 feet of depth or 30 feet of depth for fishing crappies, even though they might be there. Majority of the fish will be in that shallow littoral area that, was suggested. But before we get all into strategy and all that, let's explain a bit into the metrics and what these are. Obviously, you have your species. I just explained the gear. You also have CPUE, which stands for catch per unit effort, which is basically kind of how many catch they fish per hour. And you also have your normal range that you compare it to. And so any number that is between the normal range is considered normal. Obviously anything below 1.8 is, considered under, and then obviously anything above 21.2 is considered really high population. And so if we compare for trap nets 1.22, it's obviously lower than 1.8, meaning that, in comparison to other metro lakes or even past surveys, it seems as though the black crappie for trap nets in the year of 2015, the population was much less, or at least the fish that they were able to catch. Now, same thing with average weight as here. This is set in pounds. It goes the same way as CPUE, but you kind of get a feel for how big the fish are, and then you also have the count. And so in terms of 0.18, if I am doing a quick glance, I can tell that, oh, the crappies that they're catching are not that big. 0.18, I might, hypothesize that majority of the fish that they're catching are 7 to 8 inches for black crappies, right? So we look at it, yeah, majority of it are in the 5, 4, and 3. Wait, no, that's count. And the 6, 7, 8, 9 range for fish. And then what's also helpful is that they put in a table for quick viewing. If you don't want to look at these numbers, it's easy to just scroll down and kind of go to where you're looking for. If I'm looking for a lake that has majority of 10 and higher for eating, then I might want to look around this area, and if I see 0, I just close out of the lake and go look for another lake on the map. But one thing that I will say is that, of course, it is a snapshot, and so I've fished lakes where the surveys are terrible, and especially for bass too, it might not look the best for bass, and sometimes it's finicky, but because it's a snapshot, it doesn't always tell the full story. And so you'll have lakes that are sleepers, but it just does bad on the DNR surveys. And so that's the great thing about fishing. It's a lot of trial and error, and sometimes you just have to experience it or go test it out before you're judging it by its cover. A great thing about the Minnesota website as well is they provide a statute of fishery, or I guess status of fishery, which is basically a description from the conservation effort or the DNR about the lake itself, and kind of giving their opinions on the stocking and the survey that they provided. And so they'll go over into the maximum and the minimum and the average lengths that they caught for each species. Sometimes if they're really kind and really focused on fishing, they'll provide areas of where they will catch the most fish for each species, each species. But in here, this is more of a numbers thing. They're talking about it. But, those kinds of descriptions are rare, and I have not seen much of that. But in general, okay, cool. Let's look at the targeted survey now. In 2020, where the year right now is 2025, and so we want to look at the most recent one. If we're going after crappie, bluegill, pike, or even bass and walleye, it's part of the targeted survey, so we know they're conserving or focus on the species. We get a deeper insight into more recent times, but also species that they're actually focusing. And so we see that, okay, for crappies, it's in the normal range now. They just had to put a bit extra effort into it. But we see that the average weight is still relatively the same, and they didn't catch a whole ton anyways. And so, with this information, I might look at Lake Phelan as a place that I wouldn't go to for crappies at all. And so I would just close out of it. But if we go to this lake over here, this is Hunt Lake, a lake that I was recently looking at. Relatively shallow. As you can see, the littoral area is 134 acres. Like I mentioned, really a lot of littoral area, which is almost the entire lake. It's a much smaller lake with only maximum depth of 27 feet. But if we go into the survey, we see that, okay, in 2023, a standard survey was done. I don't generally like to fish these lakes, but sometimes I like to gamble and take my chances. We see that in the 2023 survey, going after crappies, they're within the normal range, and they caught about 25, and average weight is 0.22, which isn't the best. And then we also see in trap nets that there's also within the normal range in the 0.63, which is a lot better. This tells me that they're within the 9 inches and above range with 47. So in total, they caught about 72. So, okay, I am getting a sense that, generally they're catching relatively large crappies within this survey that they done in 2023. They also did electrofishing, which is nice. But then if we go into the table, we see that, there's majority of younger fish within the crappie school. But we look at the higher inch, this lake has 16 crappies that were between 12 to 14 inches. Pretty large, along with 5 crappies that were within 15 to 19 inches. That tells me that about 30% of the crappies that they caught were relatively large. Now, again, as I said, with much more shallow lakes, they are more prone to winter kill. I believe that this lake does, or this statue of fishery, or status of fishery does experience winter kill, which they did note in here as well. And so maybe in 2025, you might be able to catch some of these keepers. For me, I've gone and I was not lucky to catch these huge ones. I was able to catch a few, but overall, without luck or even crazy fishing knowledge, because I'm not the best fisher, or even live scope, you might not catch these crappies at all. And so one of the beautiful things about the times that we're living is that we have AI now, right? And so what we can actually do is use AI to tell us kind of the state of the surveys that we have. And so, if we want to go, a few hours out, even past Mille Lacs, say to some lake, right? This, and that looks okay. Or I guess we could just go to this lake, this Diamond Lake, right? Go to the fish surveys. We see that it's done in 2021 relatively well. We just copy and paste the whole thing, including, okay. Well, it seems like it's more of a trout lake, so let's actually not do that. Okay, this lake, Little Web, seems decent. And it has a limit for crappies and sunfish. 2023, but it doesn't look like the survey was that successful, so I would just go for the standard survey. Just do a copy and paste of everything, including the status of fishery, and we'll just ask AI based on this recent DNR survey, how good is this lake for 10 inches plus for crappies, and then just copy and paste it. and then AI will tell you kind of how it's going. It'll, basically just tell you how it is right now. Basically, do the analysis for you. Not really an analysis. Basically, just do the thinking for you, right? And so it'll tell you about the GeoNet CPUE, kind of how much you can expect it, and then along with the percentages of what you can expect as well. And so we see that, okay, majority of fish are smaller, being under 10 inches with average length being 6 inches. This is a lake that I might not want to go, even though that there are some 10 to 11 inch crappies, but they only make up about 10% of the catch. So maybe this lake isn't the best to go for. They're still, regulating it and trying to grow the species. And so that's a little bit of how you can, use it to fish for the species that you're after. Another thing that I like to do as well is to copy and paste the lake information and go based on the lake information. How can I fish this, or how can I fish it for crappies? And then just paste it as well, and then it'll tell about the lake's characteristics with the crappie behavior, telling you kind of what depth that you should fish the crappies at. You can also tell it the specific weather conditions, the wind, the barometric pressure. You can also tell it direction of the wind and even the air temperature or water temperature if you have it, and it'll tell you kind of where to go for. But generally, depending on species, that can always change as well. Another thing that I will say, and I think my last and final tip for this video, is to really look at the depth map that the DNR provides, which is really helpful. And so one of the reasons why I was hesitant on choosing Diamond Lake here is because, it's relatively a small lake, no discrimination there. But generally, I've seen, small lakes have much more of a shallow pool. And so that tells me that there might not be a lot of productive forage for food for the species that I want to go after. And so if a lake generally doesn't go past 20 feet, then I might not want to take the time to research into it, right? And if we look into much bigger lakes, such as Webb, we see that they have a bunch of crazy depth changes and also all these points where you can fish, and fish will hang out, or you'll also have different patterns, or these two structures, and they call it a horseshoe if you want to get nerdy into fishing, things like that. I don't know a whole ton about that, but generally I like more depth within my lakes. And I will say that the bigger of a lake that you fish, the more depth changes generally that you'll see. Back to my point. So what I look for is a lot of great depth within a lake. And so even though this lake is relatively medium, maximum depth is around 15, and I might avoid fishing it because not of species you see, they're not getting super big, and there's going to be a bit of species dominating within the lake. And so generally I tend to avoid a much more shallow lake. If we see hazel, we see that there is a lot of circles within the lake, meaning that, okay, there's going to be a lot of depth changes, even though this lake is pretty small. And so maybe there's a good chance that, there's going to be a lot of productivity within the lakes. And so we could also see that, this lake has rainbow trout and, relatively good eater size, I think. And so maybe it's a lake that we might want to go for if we're ever going after rainbow trout. And, one thing that I also just love about the DNR website is that they tell you, if it's canoe access, or if you have boat access, or even if there's a dock that, if you're bank fishing, you can look at a lake and see where you can go on GPS. Now, if we go to a much better lake, generally what I look for are the smaller lakes, just because I'm paddling, and a lot of people tend to love bigger lakes like Mille Lacs and Vermilion and Red. They'll go to those, and on a paddleboard, not only are you going to get lost in that lake, but it's going to take you forever to paddle from one area if you don't have a trolling motor or even a engine to kind of take you around the lake. And so if we're looking around for kind of where to go, for example, I might want to go to some of these lakes. Like this one's pretty small, but we can see that there's a ton of depth changes. It gets really deep into that 60, 70 feet area. Even this lake next to it as well. And are they connected? I don't think so, actually. But there is boat access. So, okay, I have high hopes. Let's look at this lake survey. Last time it was done, 2024 and also 2021. Let's see what they're targeting. Nothing. Okay, just kidding. That might not provide the best one. All right, let's just go standard. We see that, okay, black crappies 0.35, but it's below CPUE. They only caught 2. And yeah, okay, so even though the lake looks good, it might not be the best. But let's say that we're going for walleye. Okay, they caught a 5-pound walleye. A 5-pound walleye. You might be able to get some record ones, That one's 25 to 29 inches. Maybe if you want to go for that. If you want to go for bass or pike, might be decent, but we're not here after that. So that lake doesn't look too good. Let's check out the neighbor lake. See, perhaps if it does even better. So we'll go to the lake survey, standard survey. Nope, let's go to the targeted one. The last standard was done in 2013, which is kind of crazy. But looks like these are just targeted surveys to measure the oxygen, which is kind of strange. But we see that 40 crappies were caught in this survey, about 0.23. And we see that only about 2 were 10 inches and above. So might not want to go after that lake as well. Okay, cool. Let's try to find a much better lake. I love state park, especially if you have a state park pass, because majority of people will not go fishing in a state park just because you need to buy a state park pass. Not only that, but people use state parks for all other reasons, and so you're not really thinking of fishing when going to a state park, but generally state parks have a good lake to go for. This is the Duluth area. All right, let's see around the right area. Okay, Eagle is somewhat of a small lake, small medium lake. Maybe it's good. A lot of depth changes that I can see. Lots of species that might be good and provide food. Survey done in 2024, which is relatively recent. We see that 24 crappies, which is in the normal range, even almost above normal for population, are in the 0.67. So this tells me that, they're above average weight, meaning that these crappies surveyed in 2024 might be, here it is, above 10 inches. This might be a good lake to go after if I want to go for crappies. Eagle Lake would be a good lake to try for crappies. Another thing that I will say is look at the distribution of sizes. So for crappies, we see that 0 to 5 inches, 2 were caught within that 6 to 7 inches, 1 was caught 8 to 9, 5 inches, but majority of the fish were caught was 10 to 11. And so even if they made babies or whatever, or a lot of them will die from pikes and bass, and some of them just won't even have enough food, and so they'll just starve and die. But those that do survive because they're stronger and faster and much more experienced in surviving are these guys, the 10 to 14 inches, the 22 out of 25 out of 33, which is, above like 60-70% of the fish that they caught. If you go for crappies at this lake, your chances of catching at least above a 10 incher is like really high, right? And so if you want keeper fish, okay, this lake I would go after, you know. Not only that, but you look at the depth maps, you can kind of tell where you might want to fish. Okay, so we know that, you know, you launch over here, there's this point, there's a bit of a fast depth change here. That might be good to try. Generally, I might not go over here, but that's just because there's a lot of littoral area over here. The depth changes isn't that huge, and so maybe I might just go over here and fish this area. Maybe I will go on the opposite side because you see there's this giant depth changes from 0 feet to 20 really fast, and so fish will love that. There's also you know, all these areas where they're kind of acting as a choke point for fish. You also have this where it acts as a channel for fish. And so maps can really tell you a lot about fish behavior, where to fish, and also, you know, determine if it's even worth fishing. But if you feel like this has been helpful, make sure you like and share it, and also don't be afraid to just try it out, even if there's no surveys, even if the survey looks bad. You know, I fished in lakes that had terrible bass survey numbers, and you know, Minnetonka is one of them. I'll give an example. I don't like going to Minnetonka, but you know, I fished it every now and then. A lot of people love it for surfing, a lot of people love it for fishing, but people, you know, who live in Minnetonka or even just fish regularly at Minnetonka will tell you that there's giant crappies, giant bass in Minnetonka, even though the survey isn't the best at representing that. And so we can see that a lot of the crappies that they caught are 0.33. We look at the distribution, and also, yeah, majority of it is in the 8 to 9 inches. But people will say that there are crazy amounts in Minnetonka. You know, even bass, you know, a lot of it is small bass. Like, would you go to Minnetonka? Based on the survey, no. But based on what people know, and you know, all the people who go to Minnetonka all the time, they will say it's a great place for bass. But that is just to kind of give a feel for how to use the DNR survey, and also kind of explain, you know, where you might want to go when fishing in your state or even in Minnesota. I don't go to these lakes anymore, but a lot of people love Steiger Lake for some reason. I think it's kind of trash, but that's just a gem for you, I guess. But I will say that, of course, at the end of the day, it just comes down to trying it, and who knows, maybe you'll find a gem that I might not ever fish. So anyways, hopefully this video has been helpful. In any case, if you have any questions or anything, just let me know in the comments. Peace.